Abierta la sala.
Welcome everyone to the second webinar in a series of 3 entitled Integral Ecology and the Working Future, Reimagining University Education. My name is Jackie Raymond and I'm moderating this webinar from Sydney at the Australian Catholic University. This webinar is available in 2 languages, English and Spanish. At the bottom of the Zoom screen, in the bar on the lower right-hand side, you'll notice a globe icon and the word interpretation. Please click on English or Spanish to select which language you wish to hear. This webinar is brought to you by the SACRU Alliance. SACRU is an international alliance of Catholic research universities composed of 8 institutions: the Australian Catholic University, Boston University, the Pontifical Catholic University of Chile, the Pontifical Catholic University of Rio, Sophia University in Japan, the Catholic University of Portugal, Sacré-Cœur University in Italy, and the Raymond Lull University in Spain. This series of webinars is inspired by the papal encyclical Laudato Si on care for our common home, with a particular focus on universities and how we are being called to the socio-economic ecological crisis facing creation. The central goal of this series is to reflect on both the role of the universities and the urgent necessity to offer systemic solutions from the academy. This webinar is taking place on Zoom and it's being recorded and it will be shared on YouTube. SACRU has organised these webinars for students, academics and the general public. We hope that you listen, connect and inspire responses, including sharing widely after this webinar, the dialogue and pass on the recording to others. As participants, you are invited to submit your questions, your comments in the Q&A button at the Zoom bar. I'd now like to introduce Lillian Ferrer to say a few welcoming words. Lillian is the Vice President for International Affairs at the Pontifical Catholic University of Chile and member of the SACRU Executive Committee. Welcome, Lillian.
Thank you so much, Jackie. It's such a pleasure to be here. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night to all attendees of this second webinar in the series of webinars around integral ecology and the working future, reimagining university education. As I said, it is such a pleasure to greet you all. I would like to take the opportunity to thank everybody who have contributed to the organization of this event. At UC Chile, we feel honored to be part of SACRU, an alliance of SACRU research universities where all members share the commitment of contributing to create a better world. The Earth has suffered the repercussions on what has been mass production, which has generated climatic changes that directly affect our environment and the quality of life of human beings. As mentioned in Laudato Si, if we take into account that human beings are also creatures of this world, that they have the right to live and be happy, and that they also have a very special dignity, we cannot fail to consider the effects of environment degradation, the current development model, and the culture of waste in people's lives. How cities grow, the negative consequences of social networks, the use of internet and information, as well as the excessive use of resources. The Pope himself, in his text, mentions the outstanding debt that exists between both hemispheres, and that must be paid in the consequences generated by the overexploitation of one over the other and the global ecology. We have a historical debt in which we are concerned and committed to generating solutions that cover various areas. At SACRO, we believe that our role is fundamental in granting our communities a refreshed paradigm that proposes change. In Working Group 2 at SACRO, we search for alternatives to extend knowledge and actions, as well as influencing national and international public policies for triggering the creation of a better home. As Catholic universities throughout our globe, we believe that it is essential to provide a message of empathy, peace, and to promote economic, social, and educational models that encourage fraternity within a shared world that needs to be better treated. I wish you all success in this event, and I look forward to participate in the future ones. And thank you so much for our guests today, Mary and Juan Carlos, and to Jackie for moderating this session.
Thanks so much, Lillian. It's great to have you with us. It's now my pleasure to introduce our two speakers for this webinar. Mary Evelyn Tucker teaches at the Yale University at the School of the Environment and the Divinity School. She's co-director with John Grimm of the Yale Forum on Religion and Ecology. With Grimm, she organised 10 conferences on world religions and ecology. They were series editors for the 10 resulting volumes at Harvard. She has authored with Grimm Ecology and Religion. They also together edited Thomas Berry's books, including Selected Writings. Tucker and Grimm published Thomas Berry, a biography, in 2019. With Professor Brian Thomas Swim, Tucker and Grimm created a multimedia project that may be familiar, The Journey of the Universe, which includes a book, an Emmy award-winning film, a series of podcast conversations, and free online courses from Yale. Tucker was a member of the Earth Charter Drafting Committee and the International Earth Charter Council. Welcome, Mary Evelyn. I'd now like to introduce our second speaker, Professor Juan Carlos Munoz, who obtained a PhD in Civil and Environmental Engineering and a Master of Science in Industrial Engineering and Operations Research from the University of California at Berkeley in 2002. His research areas are public transport, transport networks, traffic and logistics. He worked at the Centre of Excellence for Rapid Transit Leeds, and which was funded by the Volvo Research and Education Foundation. He's also the director of the Centre for Sustainable Urban Development. He is dedicated to designing flexible work shifts for retail workers. Currently, Professor Juan directs the company Shift UC, dedicated to this last objective, providing quantitative solutions to human resources problems, particularly in retail. His company assigns work shifts for around 50,000 people weekly in Chile, Colombia, Argentina, Peru, Uruguay, and Brazil. Since 2020, he has been the director of the Institute for Sustainable Development at the Pontifical Catholic University of Chile. Welcome, Professor Juan Carlos. So to start our webinar, both presenters have been invited to open our dialogue session today by responding to this following statement. Higher education around the world is at an inflection point. The ongoing impact of COVID along with broader technological, demographic, and political shifts, have accelerated the need to rethink the role and the nature of the university. This kind of transformation transcends discussions of research, curriculum, learning delivery, and student support. It goes beyond questions of operating models and operational capacity. It invites us to rethink about how we can do better things, not simply how we can do things better. This webinar and the whole series is thus focused on an exploration of the most profound questions of meaning at a university, and with that, the very meaning of a university itself. Professor Mary Evelyn, would you like to respond to that paragraph?
Thank you, Jackie. Thank you, Lillian, Juan Carlos, Roman, and our translator, Kristen. It's a pleasure to be with all of you, and I'm so delighted you're doing this very important series. We all yearn for education that will speak to the great challenges of our time, and it's a privilege, too, to be part of the Laudato Si thinking on this issue, because chapter 6 that urges us forward for ecological education and ecological conversion is what I think we're all responding to. And this encyclical is such an inspiration to me, to many of my colleagues. I think there where the Pope is calling us to ecological citizenship for the whole planet and its future. And his critique of the modern mindset is something that we share in ecological education, but his particular take is something we need to elevate because of the spiritual depth of it. And this call for a new mindset is something that Thomas Berry, my teacher at Fordham many years ago, who's a Passionist priest, cultural historian, he was calling for this as well. And the projects that I'm going to speak about were very much inspired by Thomas Berry, by Teilhard de Chardin, and we were involved with the American Teilhard Association for 40 years. So that inspiration is very much behind our work that responds to the Pope's call, cry of the earth, cry of the poor. Now, I think I just want to begin by saying I appreciate the Catholic University dimension of this because I've been in secular academia my whole life. I was at Columbia for 10 years doing my graduate studies in world religions. I was at Harvard for 3 years with these conference series and at Berkeley for 3 years and here at Yale for 17 years. I also taught at a wonderful 4-year liberal arts college, Bucknell University. All of these were not Catholic universities, and the challenge is enormous for values, for a sense of spirituality and ethics that the Pope is calling us towards. I started my teaching actually with a deep commitment to community college teaching for equity, for diversity, for openness, way back in the 70s and so on. So the failure of higher education is well known, as the paragraph indicates, and as we all know, but just briefly, the disciplinolatry, the silos, the inability to have interdisciplinary conversations. I'm at the School of the Environment and the Divinity School, and they barely understand each other here at Yale. Secondly, the reward system, the tenure system that really does not encourage creative thinking, creative scholarship even. That's why Juan Carlos's work is very interesting to all of us. The cost of higher education, the inability of students to get access, the debt that they're in, and the hierarchy of knowledge. And that's one thing I want to speak about as I make a transition to the last 2 points in that great paragraph that Jackie shared, is the questions of meaning as a university and the meaning of a university itself. So if we take up this first one on meaning, it's very clear at Yale and elsewhere that science and engineering are on the top of the value system of what is important. And way at the bottom are the humanities. And this is not just a tragedy, it's a loss for integral ecology. It's a loss for integral human development and so on. because meaning is fundamentally debased. And I've been in higher education since I graduated from college 50 years ago, for my whole career. And I just see this unraveling of a sense of meaning, of purpose, of what our lives are about. I'm so pleased Sophia University's here. My special areas, Japan and East Asia, and I studied at Sophia many, many years ago. Also did graduate work at Fordham. So I know the Jesuit universities and their tremendous potential here. But in Japanese, there's a word called ikigai, which means the purpose of life. And when one loses that, we lose everything. It's almost more important than food and water and so on. But the sustenance of our spirit is what is at stake here. And that's the power of Laudato Si, because the Pope keeps coming back to that. The unbelievable myth of modernity, of consumerism, and what we are up against. And that's what Thomas Berry kept saying. We need a new dream. We need a new orientation. He called it a new story. His books are filled with this very inspiring idea of a new story. But meaning being debased to be almost worthless because it's not measurable, it's not quantifiable, it doesn't fit into the computer or statistic systems. This is madness. And we've got to name it as madness. The quality of life, the quality of the human spirit, the depths of the soul, the extraordinary capacity of the mind and heart together. And by the way, the traditions I study in China and Japan, Confucianism and Taoism, mind and heart are one. It's one character, it's not two. And I think the Latin American spirit of emotion, of feeling, of sensibility that the Earth Charter holds is something we need to bring forward and own once again, the capacity of the human feeling, thinking, being. The Chinese would say we are the mind and heart of heaven and earth. That's the definition of the human in a Chinese context. So the humanities themselves have also undermined this search for meaning by relativism, by postmodernism, by deconstructionism, by theory that, of course, is important on the one hand, to deconstruct political theories that have led to fascism, that have led to war and tremendous conflict. But when we do not have, if we only deconstruct and not construct, we leave students in a morass of meaninglessness. So I think on these two counts, that science, engineering doesn't want to deal with meaning, the humanities being debased, and humanities themselves often being unsure of how to affirm the continuity of being of life systems, the interiority of humanity, the soul of the universe, the vital force that's in all things, which again, many of the world's traditions understand. And I'll speak to that in a moment, indigenous traditions in particular. So this meaning making is what we were trying to do in this project of religion and ecology, to say, you can't just have science and policy and law and economics and technology to assist with these great environmental problems. You need ethics, spirituality, the world's religions, which is why we did this project at Harvard in the mid-90s and so on. Ecology as a branch of science is also undervalued, I'm afraid, in academia. And it has somewhat lost its sense of holism that began with the Odom brothers at the University of Georgia, that were dealing with holistic systems. And it's gone in its own quantitative mode. And this is very hard for our students. I see, honestly, at this wonderful School of the Environment, but I see a schizophrenia. The students can't put together the energies of their work and their commitment with all the detailed kinds of studies. And sometimes they lose the spirit of transformative change. So that Laudato Si says this is a spiritual crisis that we must address is, I think, at the heart of the matter. So I'll just underscore, because I think we all know, we have students who are deeply depressed, who are deeply disoriented, who are suicidal, many in our society beyond that with drugs and addiction, because of this lack of meaning and integration. How we even fit into the natural world is not really considered. So let me just say, and I think Roman is kind enough to put into the chat, and we can talk about it more in the discussion period. The Religion and Ecology project that we did at Harvard and then was brought to Yale by our dean, Gus Speth, who's a great environmentalist, was head of UN Development Program, founded World Resources Institute, and so on. And Gus Speth said, without the religious and spiritual dimension, we will not solve these problems. So that's why he brought us here 17 years ago. And let me maybe conclude. By the way, there's a large website on the Yale Forum on Religion and Ecology with a lot of information on all the world's religions, statements from the world's religions. There's a section on Laudato Si and so on. But in particular, I would just want to mention, we have been working for over a year to bring out massive open online courses on the world's religions and ecology, and to show how this relationship is critical, not just for environmental studies, but for our integral ecological being. And the other project that we've worked on, which really speaks to this larger question of the meaning of the university. Thomas Berry used to say years ago, where's the universe in the university? And that's why, with the inspiration of Thomas and Théa Desjardins, over 10 years, we did this project on Journey of the Universe to tell the story of the evolving, incredible, complex, awe-inspiring universe that gives us the inspiration for the action of change, the inspiration for perspiration, if you will, and so on. So that film, I'll make sure you can have access to it in the book, and there's a series of conversations with scientists and environmentalists and so on. But the larger context is what's missing at our university. And the context of the universe itself, a 13.8 unfolding universe, if anything can convince us of the extraordinary capacity of mystery, of the divine, of the wisdom of this process, it is viewing, understanding that particular perspective. So I'll stop here and just say that wonder and awe can lead to compassion and change that the Pope is calling us to. So thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Mary Evelyn, for those great, inspiring and framing words for us to begin the dialogue. I'd now like to pass over to Professor Juan Carlos to share with us his response to the statement that was read earlier.
Thank you, Jackie, and thank you to everyone that is meeting with us today in this Zoom meeting. I would like to thank also to the SACRU community for the honor of participating in this webinar and about something so relevant as rethinking university education, which is at the core of what we do. For us at the Institute for Sustainable Development at the Universidad Católica, this conversation is, of course, at the center of what we do every day. Now, the thoughts I will be sharing are condensed in a document we just submitted for publication with my colleagues Francisco Urquiza and Ignacio Oliva. Reacting to Mary's words, I'm very glad that she started with her statement, because she went through a lot of concepts and elements that I think are going to be brought during the conversation again and again. An interesting issue here is that the topic is so broad and has so many angles. So to address the problem of how do we rethink university education under this socio-environmental crisis, let me start by making a quite, I think, obvious comparison. We are now living through the pandemic caused by the COVID that has forced us to change our routines and dynamics that we took for granted in unthinkable ways. Decisions have been made globally that would have been impractical a few years ago. We have suspended flights, closed borders, with entire cities moving in and out of tight confinements. Education in general, and higher education in particular, has been no exception to these abrupt changes. University campuses have been practically deserted to give way to distance education, forcing academics from all latitudes to reinvent our teaching style and adopt the use of new technologies as the one we're using now. This pandemic demonstrated that, like humanity, universities can adapt to the changes that are required, becoming active agents in the search for solutions to this global health crisis. And here's the point. However, this rapid response contrasts with the slow reaction of humanity and also universities to climate change. Climate change has been alerted for more than a century and appears as a key element of the socio-environmental crisis we're facing. This crisis has been characterized by the Sustainable Development Goals and, of course, addressed by Laudato Si, and it threatens to generate an irreversible impact on the planet. Now, for decades, experts and scientists have warned about the negative impact of human activity on the planet and the urgency to change this trend before it's too late. Johan Rockström warns us that the impact of human activity threatens to exceed the ecological limits of the planet within which life as we know it's viable. Going beyond these limits threatens to generate irreversible damage, configuring scenarios of high uncertainty that will most likely not be appropriate for the well-being of humanity or of many of the species with which we share the planet. In this scenario, higher education institutions are called to play a decisive role. However, and unlike what happened with the pandemic, universities have not been able to refocus their objectives and have failed, I think, among other things, in what should be their most important task, ensuring that their students graduate with knowledge, values, and a willingness to act that is consistent with the caliber of the challenge posed by the socio-environmental crisis. Today, more than ever, as David Orr demands, universities are called to develop a new education of a certain type that will allow us to get out of this crisis and not simply to deliver more education. This slow reaction could be explained by how we humans perceive and internalize risks. Although climate change is happening extremely quickly on a geological and ecological scale, for most of us, these changes can be perceived as quite slow. Each generation evaluates the change in ecosystems from the base situation known during its own existence and not necessarily from a pre-industrial condition. This distortion in risk perception impedes us to adequately react to threats such as loss of biodiversity, deforestation, desertification, among others. It contrasts to our quick reaction to the emergency caused by the pandemic. It's predicted that climate changes will take place in an increasingly accelerated way, causing growing social instability and vulnerability in which the most disadvantaged people will be the most hit. This slow reaction is not exclusive to universities, but universities are first in line for generating new knowledge, for being aware of the risks we are facing, for proposing possible solutions to this crisis, and for training professionals who will lead us to this global crisis. The lack of adaptation should trigger a deep self-criticism on our authorities and communities. Not only we have not acted promptly to provide a deep and pertinent education in sustainability and integral ecology, but we could even be claimed indirectly responsible for training those who have made us more effective in deepening the crisis instead of solving them. Thus, adapting our education strategy becomes not only a necessity for the survival of humans and other species of the planet, but also an ethical imperative of our institutions towards all forms of life that co-inhabit the planet. So I think universities require a profound transformation, and this is what we're here for. We must simultaneously recover aspects of the identity and strengths of our institutions while we leave behind some models, paradigms that were probably useful in the past, but that today do not allow us to move forward. So let's move to the next question, and I would like to listen to Mary again and keep on this dynamic conversation.
Thank you so much, Juan. You certainly have pointed to the absolute urgency for us to adapt, and our universities are a place to model that and to live that. But we know we're also entrenched in so many patterns and wedded to particular aspects of this story. So I hope we can unpack some of that in the conversation together today. You've also highlighted that during this pandemic, there have been adaptations and shifts. We face a huge crisis that the global community is seeing all at once, which has not always been the case for the other crises we notice that are happening to our climate and biodiversity and so forth. So with that so present, I'm also wanting to go a little bit deeper now into the role of the university. And in particular, you might like to focus on the role of staff in the universities today and the role of students. Mary Evelyn, you mentioned the students and how there's such a space of despair that's being opened up and that is taking over some of that healthy space that otherwise might be a curious learner. So what might be the role now for staff, whether we're researchers, lecturers, administrators, and the role of students in this new adapted university story?
Well, that's a great question, a really important one. And you see, I think the problem is we've stripped meaning from the universe and the earth, and we've said only humans have meaning. So this tremendous alienation that takes over for students. And that's why I'm answering this question back to what Thomas Berry said, that we need this new story, we need something that's integrating and seeing us. I mean, Teilhard de Chardin said we're a phenomenon of the whole universe. We're not just something that dropped in 20 years ago as a student, 40 years ago as a faculty, or something like that. We are part of something huge. And I want to come back, of course, directly to your question, but I want to say I've had students in my office weeping after reading Journey of the Universe because they said, I now know where I belong. So this sense of a lack of belonging and wholeness. And I think, to be honest, we also have to open up the categories of Catholicism to this. It is open. Thomas Berry said to Leonardo Boff years and years ago, we can't save the environment and people without the earth. And that's why Boff's title is Cry of the Earth, Cry of the Poor, because Berry was saying we need this. So students will respond if we give them a context for what Juan Carlos, I think, is putting before us, the honest sensibility that we don't have all the answers, that universities are far from perfect, that we are struggling. And I think we have to open up that door of conversation. And when we do, I find it's quite astounding because the students at the environment school have all kinds of idealism and they're ready to go. And the students at the divinity school have a lot of spiritual resources too. And I want to be very specific. If we, in the ends of our classes, we always allow them to do creative projects, which means anything from poetry, music, and drawings and so on. It is phenomenal what they come up with. And that it gives them the energy. Teilhard's whole thing was about human energy. If we lose that, as he said, between the two world wars, we lose all possibility. So this is a question of sustaining energy for this transformation. I think we can do it when we open up honestly to students. We're in this together. I like to say it's an intergenerational handshake. And also to my colleagues, many of whom are also struggling with their lack of meaning and purpose and so on. And it's very striking that this COVID has opened up that space. So I think we have to affirm the wholeness of faculty, not just their research and their CVs and so on, but we have to affirm the whole person. Mental health across the board is absolutely critical. So it's a great question. Again, I think meaning and purpose will animate people as we open up that possibility. And the natural world itself will give us sensibilities of restoration and resilience for these transformations, of equity, of ecology, and so on. Juan Carlos, yeah.
Thank you. Again, my answer will hit very aligned with, or will be perceived very aligned with Mary's. One of the original purposes of a university is, of course, searching for truth through knowledge. And this tireless search has resulted in the generation of new knowledge and also its democratization, as well as great advances that have benefited all society. However, we should recognize that in this effort, our agenda has often been disconnected from caring for the planet. Although the science developed from the universities has been key in the identification, study, and partially in the communication of the risks that emerge from the socio-environmental crisis, this message has so often been disconnected with our own actions. This creates the feeling that our universities are ivory towers, a seat of privileged and objective spectators who do not get involved or react in accordance with what they discover. This is evidenced by the fact that most universities lack a transversal teaching in sustainability and do not consider sustainability as a pillar for developing and managing university facilities and campuses. This is serious, I think, because it implicitly transmits incoherence to our students. We are accepting that there is an insurmountable gap between theory and practice, between the verification of facts and the commitment to face them. If we really want to contribute from universities to the transition to a sustainable society, we must start by recognizing what paradigms or frameworks explain our apparent failure or slowness in the adoption of this challenge. Now, the first paradigm that we must question is the idea that knowledge is fragmentable. And this is very convenient for universities, of course. As knowledge becomes specialized and reaches greater depth, universities structured their faculties and careers as disciplinary silos. Now, while the achievements of this strategy are undeniable, so are its counterproductive effects that arise from a disciplinary biased approach. The most relevant, complex, and urgent problems that the humanity faces are far from being monodisciplinary. The necessary interaction between different disciplines becomes increasingly difficult in our institutions as a result of language gaps and failing to establish effective channels of communication and collaboration. Instead of interest among academic groups, we too often see disinterest and sometimes even mistrust. A second assumption that I think must be overcome refers to the enlightening role that universities would have within our society. It's undeniable that a university is the place where discussions and critical research take place. Schools of thought, scientific advances, and even political ideologies emerge from them, which have led to associating universities to a beacon that must be respected and listened to. However, an education for sustainability must be able to recognize its position within society. Nowadays, universities are places that house an intellectual and often an economic elite that carries out its research in a protected context and often distanced from the subject of study. This positionality implies that not all the knowledge or experiences necessary for the real progress of our society will be on campus. As Mary was mentioning, we must recognize that universities, rather than seeing themselves as beacons that illuminate or guide the rest of the population, should be understood as an important component within a web of knowledge spread within society. Only this way would we collect other knowledge necessary for sustainability, such as ancestral or local knowledge, and integrate it into academic work. So I think here there's a big area to work that probably should make us rethink how we are structured as universities, as organizations, and how we think our role in society.
Thank you, Juan Carlos. That helps move to another question. Rather than prepare for the future, Pope Francis has turned our attention through the COVID crisis to say that we need to prepare the future now. So in what ways, if any, are you seeing or noticing your university or other universities prepare the future now? Mary Evelyn, would you like to start?
Yes, thank you. And thank you, Juan Carlos, for those fine remarks. You know, because I so agree with disciplinolatry and elitism and elitism I see all around me at Yale, and self-importance and so on. And I do want to just pick up that belatedly, these self-important universities are responding, you know, the Harvards and Yales and so on. There's a whole effort on planetary solutions now. FedEx has given a huge grant for carbon solutions and whatnot. It's belated, though, I really have to say, because of the disciplinolatry and the reward system and so on. But my hope is actually in students who have pushed for, we do have very good sustainable programs at Yale for measuring carbon footprint at Yale and green buildings. And I'm in the first green building at Yale at the School of the Environment and so on. But so in that respect, it's moving in the directions that David Orr, his whole career was trying to get us to move. But I would also say that with student movement forward, they are like Greta Thunberg, you know, saying this is our future, it's right here. But they're also pressing, and this is true at our School of the Environment, for diversity. You know, it was only last year, and this is a school that's well over 130 years old, that the two first non-white, the two first minority faculty were hired. And when I came 17 years ago, there were no women tenured faculty. So the sensibility of inequities are really huge, but are changing. And I want to just say the School of the Environment has concentrated on nature, management, and so on. I frankly don't think we can manage nature, even though we have a degree of, of environmental management. That's what a myth is that, you know. But we have created some of the wonderful environmentalists, and including people from all over the world. You know, at least a third of our classes are international students. The school has people from all over the world, but it has been very nature-centered. The School of Divinity has been very human-centered, and only recently has it gotten that we need ecology and religion and ecology. So, but I do think we're on the cusp of transformation. And when the COP December 15 came about, and I said to my colleague in the summer when Laudato Si came out, and he's a lawyer and so on, I said, what do you think about Laudato Si? He said, oh, the Pope didn't get cap and trade. And then in January 2016, we had a panel on post-COP, and he held up Laudato Si and said, this is why we got the COP agreement. So we do have a changed environment to build on, which I think is very hopeful. And that's why the Pope's encyclical is so important. Let me just say two quick things. The problem with ecology and the sciences is that it's research without even going towards policy, and going towards activism or advocacy is really a problem. So again, we have this division between so-called objective research, NSF science funded research, and engagement with the world and its problems. So we've always said our work is engaged scholarship. Here's the final point I would say in a positive frame. Traditional environmental knowledge of indigenous peoples from all over the world, and the course that we're going to lift up with these online courses on indigenous traditions and ecology has the most profound people, programs, and so on, with traditional environmental knowledge being highlighted, restoration of rivers, streams, fisheries, et cetera, but often with the combination of so-called Western science. So I think this is extremely hopeful, and it's already happening on the ground. So these transformations are happening even at centers of privilege and power and around the world that will affect these universities, I think.
Thank you, Mary. So the question here is, how do we see universities as preparing the future, right? A key university goal is, of course, to form those new professionals, the people that will go to our society to work, to change it, to create it in some way. And we think that our alumni should see themselves as capable of being the change they want to see in the world. And their challenge as universities is that they see themselves not as a single person within thousands of millions of persons in the planet, but instead as part of a generation that has been educated to become agents of change. So I will go through 4 ideas that I think are relevant for this question. The first one I think that universities should do to prepare the future is to develop empathy for the world that turns into active hope. Traditionally, higher education has been understood as a space dedicated exclusively to the exercise of reason. Now, during the last decades, this conception has evolved through the idea of the third mission, which encourages universities to establish concrete links with society. So why not let us encourage universities committed to sustainability to incorporate a fourth one, which would be the ability to empathize with the world we inhabit. Empathizing is not part of our curriculums at all. In many cases, feeling a deep motivation and commitment to the planet is what has prompted us to dedicate our lives to research. It's also why sometimes our students come to study with us. It is deep in the reason why they want to follow sometimes a degree. But this is not something that is sufficiently recognized or valued despite being a fundamental engine for the development of knowledge relevant and sensitive to the pains of society and the planet. Now, feeling pain for the world, as proposed by Joanna Macy, is essential to connect the vulnerability and deficiencies that exist on the planet and act accordingly. The challenge here is to overcome utilitarian paradigms by embracing virtuous life models through which human activities ensure prosperity for other forms of life too. Empathy must be fundamental to our university work, and I think today is not. So the challenge is to deal with the natural suffering for ecosystems and all forms of life in such a way that is conducted to an active hope that moves the world in the right direction. Hope in this case should not be understood as a blind faith that things will be better. The work for empathy must be deep, it must be mobilizing, and it must focus on hope. The second point is empathy for the world starts with respect, care, and equality between all. So if you feel empathy for the world, you realize that there can be no planetary sustainability without simultaneously solving our social problems. This drives universities into 2 immediate challenges: inclusion and gender equality, which were addressed by Mary too. And we didn't prepare our talks together. Universities must be inclusive by definition. Knowledge and talents are distributed equally within society without discriminating by gender, socioeconomic status, race, or legal status. We must then aspire to be inclusive and capable of offering a safe space to cultivate the different talents existing within society, considering an additional effort to give space to talents found in the most neglected sectors, facing unfair barriers that hinder access to higher education. Failure in this task implies a loss that no society can afford, much less in a context of socio-environmental crisis. Our universities should invest and innovate more to identify and embrace the diverse talents and develop and promote tools necessary for them to flourish. Now, gender equality is also an urgency. Today, women are underrepresented at the highest academic categories and managerial positions, despite the fact that they unquestionably have the same merits as their male counterparts to assume this task. Not long ago in Chile, among like the 40 chancellors of the Chilean universities, no one was a woman. It's urgent then that universities adopt decisive policies that favor gender parity at their administrative levels, teaching staff, and student body. At the same time, we must develop professional and academic incentives that do not discriminate against women who wish to be mothers and allow caregiving tasks to be equitably distributed among fathers. The emergence of remote work as a result of the pandemic offers an opportunity to consolidate this objective. The third topic is innovate, share, learn, and so on. Research and innovation are central to the work of universities. Within its classrooms and labs, many initiatives and solutions for sustainable development are being developed. The ability to respond to the crisis through new solutions and the virtuous cycle they may create takes us to the issue of patents. Given the urgency of the social environmental crisis, it seems appropriate to question whether this scheme is the most appropriate to developing areas that are substantial for global sustainability. Questioning the patent scheme requires discussing on alternative systems of recognition for creators to continue promoting these developments, ensuring that these results are shared. And the last point, Jackie, is transformative teaching for sustainability. We must question the education we're providing to students. The ecological collapse facing the planet does not occur in times of lack of education, but rather of a lack of education of a certain type. The exercise of educating and teaching should aspire to form agents of change committed to the planet. We must be able to train students capable of discerning and being aware of the consequences of their actions in such a way that they are able to decide what role they want to play in the world in which they live. As Pope Francis, I think, and this is key to what we do, said during his visit to our university, it is necessary to teach how to think about what you feel and do, to feel what is thought and done, to do what you think and feel, and put these capacities at the service of the person and of the society. So here, the challenge is enormous for institutions where reason is the single educational driver. It's all about reason. Is it correct or wrong? Since only by addressing the student integrally, we will be educating agents of change. This task will not only require transforming the focus of our teaching and updating methodologies, as we already had to do because of the coronavirus, so we know how to adapt. It will also force us to experiment and open ourselves to a different teaching than the one we and our trainers were educated. So this is a huge challenge, and this is what we're trying to do here at the institute I have to lead.
Thanks, Juan. That's great. And I think, you know, talking about an integral education and a shift in terms of that meaning making coming out from the space of intellect and feeling and heart and all of that holistic response. I wonder, you've explored some things that can make that come about, but perhaps there's some other things as well. So to enable this reorientation to happen, what might need to happen? How could we do that? What do you think, Mary Evelyn? From your experiences, how has that reorientation happened? How can it further happen so that we can really live this story of Laudato Si and integral ecology? What needs to happen?
Well, I do think there's great potential with the Catholic universities and this wonderful organization, and I really hope it will grow. And I loved Juan Carlos's comments, and so grateful for them and what he's doing. So I do think that the Catholic universities have great potential, the Jesuit universities in particular. I used to say to my mother, if we have a pope that's believable and lovable and has an environmental perspective, we have hope for the planet. So I feel more than ever this particular moment is astounding, and that the Jesuit universities here in North America are working at Loyola in Chicago each year, bringing together someone from their theology department and someone from their science department to try and incorporate a much more integrated understanding for environmental studies. And of course, Laudato Si is central to that. So I think the new action plan, 7-year action plan, is absolutely critical. This is going to be harder in the secular universities for sure, but I have enormous confidence in the students to drive this. Let me give you just one example so that Juan Carlos can jump in as well. But we just had 8 or 9 graduates from Latin America write to the dean here at the School of the Environment to say, where is Mother Earth? Where is Pachamama in the curriculum? And I thought this is fantastic. This is Latin America, Pachamama, Universal Declaration of the Rights of Mother Earth, etc. This is the juice that we need. And so we welcome this partnership and so on. But the dean said, well, I'm a scientist, I can't really do it. And she passed it over to John and myself, and we responded, and I'm happy to share the response. But this is where next generation and students and graduates are really pushing all of us to a truly integral ecology that has a spiritual depth to it. So Juan Carlos, I want to make sure you have a chance to jump in.
When I was a student representative in my 20s, I remember that I would go to the as a representative to the board of deans, and they would say, Juan Carlos, we cannot go that fast. Universities have historically been slow-moving institutions. We are prudent. Now, I wonder, and I think that in many cases, this might be like an active, something good to have. Like, I wonder if we can afford now this prudency. We must assume a critical role to achieve sustainable development. And this requires universities to undergo, I think, an institutional transformation. So I'll go now through some points which I think are interesting, and they're going to also match with what Mary has been saying. I think university must embrace complexity and approach it from an integrating and systemic perspective. Universities should switch from the quite comfortable monodisciplinary perspectives into a more complex one, in which the relationships between disciplines and the patterns that emerge from them are addressed and better understood. The monodisciplinary approach we're so used to often leaves universities displaced with respect to many complex and urgent problems that we must tackle. Instead, we must invest great efforts and resources to generate mechanisms, incentives, and new academic units that enable and promote interdiscipline. I always like to say an anecdote that when my university decided to inaugurate the Center for Sustainable Urban Development, they gathered two professors, one from transport engineering, which was me, and one from urbanism for city planning, was Professor Barton. And they said, you two have to do this together, make this new Center for Sustainable Urban Development. And we had never met before. And we were working in the same university in very similar problems. We had never met before. And I think this happens very often in many universities, where people that could collaborate, that work on problems that are relevant, and are very comfortable dealing with them from a very monodisciplinary way. So under an interdisciplinary approach, we could, for example, better understand and study the interdependent relationship between climate change, social exclusion, and inequality, which sometimes now they look like worlds apart. Like, oh, you're mixing things. Now we're not mixing things. We're trying to address them very internally. And we should also understand university work from collaboration. We must embody the importance of collaborating. If the logics of competitiveness that have governed the last century have led us as humanity to deep crisis, it would be naive to think that these same logics will be the ones that will allow us to get out of this. Therefore, universities should advocate a collaborative approach and radical openness in which solidarity, reciprocity, retribution, and mutual support predominate. Another issue, which that is very relevant, is how do we approach our research? And I think we need to move towards action-oriented research. The new research in sustainability must be oriented to the resolution of socio-environmental problems. Although the theoretical and monodisciplinary research is and will continue to be fundamental, the development of applied research that seeks to contribute to responding to the urgent problems that take place in different parts of the planet must be decisively promoted. In this way, the institutions will clearly respond to the urgent climate crisis facing the planet. And this takes me to transdiscipline, which is very related with what Mary was saying. For good research focused on problem solving, which understands reality from its complexity, researchers must know how to work not only with their peers from different disciplines, but also with the communities that are affected by the problems. Scholars must develop the ability and willingness to approach new needs, knowledge, and aspirations that exist beyond the academic comfort zones. Clearly, this form of research requires great effort so that researchers can break the disciplinary ties, generate bonds of trust with the communities, which will not happen without adequate support and promotion through specially designed incentives. And finally, I would like to ask universities to take a stand about this crisis. I think our universities must take a position of deep reflection and active hope to promote a change that stops or modifies the logic that has led us to this socio-environmental crisis. The universities should modify the relationship with other entities, such as civil society organizations, local governments, and companies. Like all changes, these transformations will face resistance, and the institutions will have to address these tensions by favoring the well-being of the planet. These complex and sometimes uncomfortable dialogues should yield a better conception of what we understand by sustainable development, a clear role to achieve it, and detect activities that should be promoted and those that should be stopped supporting. The academy must take its position using a language that is truthful and clear to describe and explain the socio-environmental crisis. Otherwise, it risks deepening its dissociation from society. An obvious example is global climate action. Universities' message must be decisive, clear, and responsible. Despite the resistance or tensions that may arise by taking a stand, universities have the opportunity to collaborate and innovate, as has happened with the coronavirus pandemic. So yeah.
Thank you so much, Juan Carlos. Thank you, Mary Evelyn. It's been an amazing hour of dialogue and thought-provoking responses that really calls the university sector to transform at this time beyond what it's already begun doing. So I want to thank you both and invite you each, if you would like to say some concluding remarks to each other, to our audience, our global audience, feel free. Mary Evelyn.
Well, I'm just so grateful, Jackie, to all of you and to the university for hosting this, and to Juan Carlos for his wonderful comments, and to our translator, very, very grateful, and to Lillian for being with us throughout, and Roman for organizing. I'm really very grateful, and it gives me tremendous hope that we can do this globally. Isn't it the case? And you know, I especially want to underscore how much I think Latin America has to offer in this regard. It's so important. You will help North America to get out of their heads, into their hearts, and into an integrated educational system. And I want to just thank my husband, John Grimm, who does specialize in indigenous peoples, and how much the peoples of Chile and other parts of Latin America are important in this work as well. So deep gratitude all around. Thank you, thank you.
Thank you, Mary Evelyn. Juan Carlos, would you like to say anything in your conclusions?
Yes, thank you very much. I think it's been an interesting conversation, and I think we have been addressing so many important issues for universities to move towards sustainability. And there are elements that I would have loved to share about how we have at the Catholic tried to address these challenges, which are so huge. So one of the elements that I think is very, very important is that the campuses and the campus and the universities are very coherent in the way we work, we operate. That the life that the students see at the campus is coherent with the answer that the universities are giving to this crisis. If this coherence is broken, and the students see that what happens in the campuses is not really what they're being taught or what they understand that needs to be done, that is very depressive, and I think it sends a terrible message. So a very relevant issue here is, how do universities, for instance, embrace carbon neutrality in a way that it hurts? And also, how do we make the life in a campus the life we want to see in the world? And finally, another issue that we are very proud at Catholic University is how we have developed a set of courses that are of general optatives that anyone can take, that are being given by a set of interdisciplinary professors that address different angles, or sometimes the whole issue of sustainability, providing a marvelous space where the students feel that they finally receive the education that they were looking for, in which it's not just only about right or wrong answers, but also about sharing, learning from not only from the professor, but also from the other students, identifying the peers from different disciplines that have the same interest and also would like to make a change in the world. So I think that there's many opportunities here that we should cross-breed from within universities to learn from what others are doing. I would be delighted to know a little bit more of what other universities are doing to address these very important challenges. Thank you very much for the opportunity of having this conversation with you, Jackie, and
thank you.
It's been an absolute pleasure, Juan Carlos. Thank you for everything that you've shared, and the call for continuing these relationships, for continuing to work together. Lillian, would you like to say any concluding remarks yourself?
Yes, Jackie. I mean, I honestly think this was such an inspiring webinar. There is so much work that still needs to be done. And definitely we all need to work together in order to accomplish good results. So it is such a pleasure to see two universities, one a Catholic university, another one a non-Catholic university, but all searching for ways to create a better world. And in that sense, also, I would like to, of course, thank SACRU for the opportunity of congregating research universities, but also to thank Mary for being here with us, and for you, Jackie, for moderating the session, and of course, Roman, who has been backstage organizing everything, and to everybody that has participated. There is a big group behind this type of meetings, and we thank them all for all the great work.
Indeed. Thanks so much, Lillian. Thanks to our interpreter. Thanks to you all. It's been an absolute joy, and I wish you all well. Take good care, and the next webinar will be held in a couple of weeks' time. Roman, could you just remind us of the date in case we want to let people know? It's going to include Father Joshua Carethodum at the Dicastery for Integral Human Development as a speaker. And I'm just wondering, Roman, if you'd like to chime in with the date.
Okay, it's going to be the 1st of July.
Perfect, the 1st of July, fantastic. And we'll share the invitation to the next SACRU webinar, Inspired by Laudato Si, with you shortly. Thanks, everybody. Take good care. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you. Thank you.
Oh, bye-bye. Bye, Jackie.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank
Wonderful.
you.
Thank you, Mary Evelyn.
Thank
Juan
you.
Carlos.
Thank you.